This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we have #1 New York Times bestselling author Meg Gardiner joining us to talk about her new release in the unsub series, SHADOWHEART. Welcome, Meg.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks.
It is absolutely phenomenal that you're here. I promise I will not fangirl too hard. Okay.
Oh, go on, please. I don't get it from my kids.
Before we jump in, would you mind giving the audience an overview of just what SHADOWHEART is about?
Sure. It's a thriller about two serial killers who seem to be rivals. They take up a competition with each other. The heroine is Caitlin Hendricks, a young FBI profiler who thinks she's taking on a cold case with an incarcerated killer named Ephraim Judah Good, who starts drawing eerie sketches of women he claims he's killed after he's already in prison. And the case turns scorching hot when somebody on the outside starts duplicating Good's murders and leaving the victims at the same locations where he did. So Caitlin, instead of just profiling this guy behind bars, is suddenly trying to delve deep into two very twisted minds and figure out what they're after. If they're competing, what do they think they're going to win? What are they trying to get? Who are they trying to get? What's going on? And unmask this second killer and capture them.
The complexity of what you just talked about, you did it so effortlessly and so seamlessly that to the reader it's not complex. But when I sat back and thought about it, I was like, oh my gosh, how many puzzles did she give us here? Because there's the overall plot puzzle, but then there's the puzzle, obviously Caitlin is a profiler, so she's going into the puzzle of each of their minds.
Correct.
How hard was that to construct?
That's why they call it brainstorming. You have to think about it a lot. The novel was sparked, as are all the unsub novels have, a real life case somewhere at their core, so that there's that nugget of authenticity behind the investigation. And SHADOWHEART grew out of hearing about Samuel Little, who was a convicted killer who, once he was locked up, he started sketching a whole bunch of women that he claimed no one knew he had killed over the past several decades and across the country. So that was just shocking. He confessed to a Texas Ranger who was able to start corroborating a lot of those killings, tragically. But I started thinking, here's a guy who's behind bars. Suddenly he seems even more dangerous than he had been. How did he get away with all of this for so long? Who were his victims? Why didn't their families know that they were no longer alive? Was nobody looking for these people? And what does it say about the criminal justice system that he was able to carry out all these murders across the country for ages? And then I started thinking, okay, you have a fictional convicted killer. Why would he spontaneously confess after he's already in jail? Why does he draw these very eerie, lifelike, almost poignant sketches? He's a psychopath. He's manipulative. What is he after? He's behind bars, but does that mean he's harmless? What's going on here? So then I started thinking, well, okay, he's sending this bad stuff out into the world. Maybe victims' families are now going to realize what happened to their loved one, and that's part of the story. But it's not only good people who get wind of these drawings. And I thought, well, what if someone out there decided to emulate him for some reason. And at that point, the story's off and running.
Well, you just touched on so many things that came up in this novel for me. So my head's exploding a little. So
Okay.
I'll
tuck it back in. Tuck it back in. It's okay.
One of the things, just an overall comment, I loved what you just explained, that you did take these actual cases, and in many cases, in many instances, you shared them with the reader and educated us. Exactly that case, you mentioned it in the story. I was blown away by it, because you often hear this. There's a case in the news right now in the United States where on the East Coast, there's more victims coming up that we're finding out, after
today,
the fact. And it's a question: why would these folks ever want to tell? What is the psychology behind it? What is their interest and motivation, like you said? But you also touched on something that really just tugged at my heart when I read it. You talked about missing persons, and you just mentioned, why didn't the families say, oh my gosh, my sister, brother, whoever it was, didn't come home, and they haven't come home for years. And you mentioned that a little bit about why sometimes missing persons cases aren't even reported. And that kind of broke my heart, because I think for a lot of us, we just think, well, oh my gosh, if anyone in our family were missing, they'd be on the milk carton, they'd be on every telephone pole, I'd be on CBS News trying to tell everybody. Can you share a little bit about that, what your research uncovered about that?
I mean, there are so many families that are heartbroken to find out that, they've had years of uncertainty, not knowing whatever happened and fearing the worst. But it's true that sometimes families don't get along. There's been a bad situation, and so sometimes a teenager runs away, or someone's a young adult, and they and the rest of their family are on the outs, and they've had a girlfriend or boyfriend, and maybe the parents decided, okay, we don't need to put up any bail money now. Susie and Johnny have decided to take off for Vegas, like they always threatened, and we'll hear from them if they ever get their act together. And that's not what happens. So, and sometimes victims would have been found who, were found much later, so that it was impossible to determine a cause of death. Or law enforcement, they had just had a Jane Doe who they thought it may have been a natural death. She might have died of exposure, and they found her remains 6 months later. Could have been an overdose. Again, years later, they find the remains, and there's no way for them to know. So it is heartbreaking. And so I didn't want to make light of that. I mean, it's a thriller. It's supposed to entertain, but I wanted to acknowledge that it's not just a puzzle. It's always so much more about, even for fictional characters, we want to understand that the characters are people who have people in their lives who matter deeply. And that turns out to be one of the major threads in the story is a teenager who is convinced that her birth mom had to be one of the victims of that is in the drawing. So that becomes a major thread in the story.
Our friend Finch is her name.
Yes.
She was an amazing character because she's much younger than Caitlin. Caitlin's established in her career. She's a strong, brilliant woman. Finch is 18, right, but she's extremely strong, and she's looking for things, arguably with even more motivation than Caitlin is. She has arguably more personal motivation to find out about her family than even Caitlin does to try to, go catch whoever she's trying to catch.
It's personal for Finch in a way that it's not for Caitlin. Or Finch has convinced herself it must be personal. She's an adoptee. Every time she walks down the streets in New York City, her whole life she's wondered, am I related to you? She has a wonderful adoptive mother. She's very close to her, but she's always wondered what happened to her birth mom. And then this case erupts, and she starts thinking, well, if this could have been my mom was one of his victims, I'm not going to rest until I find out and I get justice for her. She's 18. She's got a lot more momentum than wisdom, shall we say? So when she puts the pedal to the floor, listening to an FBI agent even isn't necessarily going to stop her when Caitlin tells her to be careful, much less her mom, who she thinks treats her like a baby.
Exactly. One of the interesting things about that is, for as different as Finch and Caitlin are, there are some similarities. And one of the questions that comes up for Caitlin as she's trying to solve ultimately what's going on, solve the mystery, figure out who is this new unsub, is she's trying to question what are the similarities between Good and the new killer, and what are the differences between them. And you have some brilliant conversations between her team members where they really try to drill down into that. Was it hard trying to fit together, okay, well, where is there going to be so much copycat alignment, and where would the deviations be?
Again, that's what the magic of rewriting is about. I don't want to disillusion readers, but we do think a lot of, I'm sure you do as well. When you're writing, we have to figure out, am I just imagining that this is actually compelling? Does it make sense? Let's let somebody else read it or listen to me babble on about it. Sorry to my husband.
Thank goodness for husbands, because
yes,
those initial sounding boards where you can look up from the keyboard and say, well, wait a minute, does that make sense?
Exactly.
So lots of kudos to the husbands that are out there, or significant others in any form or fashion, or even the pets who are listening.
Yes, they're more patient sometimes.
They can be. One of the other themes that you looked at very deeply, which I think is pretty normal when you have a character that's a psychopath, is the need that some humans have for manipulation and control. That seems to be at the root of a lot of our problems in humanity, is that some people want to control, they want power. When you looked at it from Caitlin's perspective, when she's interrogating these people or looking at crime scenes or things, what did you want to say about manipulation and control, and kind of how the good guys versus the bad guys are coming at it? Because there is an element that folks in the law enforcement community have, right? To the extent that Good is in prison, they somewhat can control him. They can control where he's going and what he's doing, but it's a very different type of a thing. And how did you kind of come at that, just intellectually, that little inherent conflict?
Well, there's the real life psychological aspect, and then there's the dramatic aspect. Of course, as you're writing a scene, it has to twist and turn and be as tense and suspenseful as possible. But law enforcement who interview convicted killers or people that have been under arrest or suspects that they think are psychopaths, they have to be very careful not to succumb to the expert manipulation that the suspect is likely to be trying to put over on them, because that's what psychopaths, that's basically their modus operandi, is to try to get over on other people. So that's why Caitlin and her boss at the FBI, they're talking before she goes in to interrogate Good, like, how can you try to get around the fact that you know that he's going to be trying to manipulate you? How do you make sure he doesn't get to you? What will get to him? What will he, he lies, he manipulates, he assumes everybody else does too. They don't have a broad understanding of the rest of humanity, who have normal psychologies and neurologies and compassion and a conscience. So, but I'm doing everything from listening to podcasts to reading to talking to FBI agents to understanding what has worked in interrogations. But just getting in there and being the bad cop is not going to get you what you want. Trying to shame a psychopath into doing the right thing.
It's not going to work.
It's not going to work.
Relying on the empathy that they don't have.
Correct.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. In terms of your research, everything was just so real. Have you ever done any of those classes at Quantico, or has it just been more of actually talking to the people who do this for a living?
I have not done any classes at Quantico, but I have done seminars at the FBI field office in New York City that they have offered for writers before, and that the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, has done for writers, and that gives a great insight into the kind of work that the Bureau does and what various agents in various different departments do. You get a sense. It's just watching and talking to the people who do the work. You get you try to hook into a little bit of what excites them about their job. What's the best part? What drives them? What's tough? So that was really illuminating.
Well, thank you for that, because there was just so much authenticity in so many layers, and it was just phenomenal. Those scenes where you have law enforcement against the psychopath, and they're both trying to move, frantically trying to move for space on that chessboard, and it was just phenomenal.
Well, good. I wanted it to be a duel.
It certainly was. It was kind of like the 12 o'clock high out there in Main Street, right, in the Old West. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about that was, again, so well crafted was the fact that this is a story within a series. Mm-hmm. We have met Caitlin in other places, and the other places she's been have informed who she is now. Mm-hmm. And she still considers herself a work in progress. Right. And what I loved was this story is totally readable as a standalone. You gave us enough. Everything was absolutely there. People who haven't read Caitlin before are going to want to go back and read every story with her, and they're going to want to read everyone from this point on. But one of the things I think you did that was so well done, and I'd like to say it out here, but I don't want to give spoilers. There is a continuing thread in Caitlin's story about another case that she's dealt with.
Correct.
And it continues, not in a huge way. It doesn't dominate this story. This story is this story, but it's running through in a very subtle way. It's continuing to help the plot and the pacing. It's keeping us holding our breath every page.
Oh, good.
How did you decide, hey, I want to keep this thread? And how did you decide how much you wanted and how much you didn't want to be in this story?
Well, I'm so grateful that you found that you thought that a reader could pick this up as a standalone and read it, because that's exactly what I want each of these books in the series to be, that they're each about a case that the Caitlin investigates. So they wrap up, but not completely sometimes. I'm sorry. I know some readers don't like to hear it, but I'm a fan of the occasional loose thread. So there is a loose thread, a dangler that carries over from unsub. The case Caitlin breaks, but doesn't completely wrap up, which means that there's a threat lurking out there that she is aware of. It doesn't dominate, but she wants to put it to bed. And every now and then, like something popping up on a wave in the ocean, you get a sense that there's still a bad guy out there who is keeping his eyes on her, and that she wants to get eyes on him. So it's a balance. You've got to make sure that is there, that it creates its own sense of tension and uncertainty without taking over from the main story. So I hope I did that well.
You absolutely did. And what I love about those threads, and I understand everybody always wants everything wrapped in a bow, but I can assure readers, you wrap this story in a very nice bow. And to the extent that you have threads that are tying, in the series and things that Caitlin's still thinking about, what I love about that is, as a thriller writer, especially police thriller, we're fighting against the reality that most police officers or most FBI agents will tell you, gee, we wish we could solve these things this quick, but we don't usually solve them this quick. Right?
Exactly. And that's actually part of what Caitlin is trying to learn as she becomes more experienced at the work and she works on herself, is that she doesn't have to take the whole world onto her shoulders and fix it. So doing her part is it's important to her, but learning that she can only do her part is part of what's the work that she's taking on. So, but it's always fun to have a teaser out there, to have something whispering at readers from the tall grass saying, hey, don't forget about this over here.
And it does, again, it gives that air of authenticity, because the truth is, not everything's always wrapped up in a bow within a short amount of time. You did mention what Caitlin's dealing with and how she's dealing with it. And I thought it was really interesting that you talked about when she's telling other characters how she's dealing with this, or she's has her own internal dialogue, walking herself through things. You talked about how she needs and is cognizant of trying to stay present. And like you said, not look down the road and say, I have to take all of Atlas's responsibilities onto my shoulders. And I noticed you mirrored that in the way that she would use her Caitlin superpowers to track down the current killer. And I noticed she would get quiet and say, okay, I just need to focus on this now. I can't take on all these other ideas that I'm trying to think about. I need to narrow in on what I'm trying to look at in this crime scene, for example.
Okay, good.
It's so cool how you did that, and you took it from both sides and showed how she's using these techniques to the betterment of herself as a professional and a personal basis. So,
I'm glad you think that Caitlin's on a positive trend.
She is. We're so happy for her. Again, amazing ending. Absolutely amazing ending. This whole book, I was holding my breath, even when it was in the forensics of whoever it was at the crime scene, when she's traveling, meeting new teams. Is she going to integrate with a new local team? I mean, suspense upon suspense layers. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I'm just delighted that you enjoyed it so much. That means a lot to me.
Now, I've tried to stay off the fangirl bandwagon, and I have tried to be good, and it's going to pop out a little bit here. So you have achieved so much in your life in so many areas, and you've done it throughout a dynamic period for women. And let's just start with Jeopardy. Three times Jeopardy champ. Come on, Meg.
Come on. I've got this giant trivia lobe in my brain. What can I say? I was a super fan of Jeopardy all my life, and finally I thought, why am I just sitting here on my couch rattling off the answers when it's easy and there's no pressure on me? Why don't I go ahead and, it says, if you want to be a contestant, call this number, log in. So I finally did. And it was the most fun I'd had in ages. It was absolutely fantastic.
Well, I have to say, having seen the whole arc of Jeopardy, even transitioning to what it is now post Alex Trebek, I have to say, getting on, doing what you did on there, Jeopardy changed a lot, obviously, over time in terms of who the contestants were. And, maybe that reflected whether contestants all felt comfortable, because at first there weren't that many female winners on Jeopardy. And so that was amazing. You're a mom of a beautiful family. That is amazing.
And if you want to talk about the arc of women here, my daughter is also a Jeopardy champion. Okay,
this is just getting too cool. So now your mom status just went through the roof. because you just like raised another generation.
So we haven't checked. We think we may be the only mother-daughter Jeopardy champions, but I'm so proud of her. It's just so exciting and wonderful.
Did you actually go to the studio for the taping?
Yes, she's been on twice. She was on. She was one of the very last people who got to tape with Alex Trebek, like only maybe a couple of weeks before he finally couldn't continue. But that was during COVID, so they didn't have a studio audience. But last fall, she was invited back for the wildcards, the Champions wildcard tournament, and I was able to go for that. So that was, I think I got to be the embarrassing mom in the audience. You know.
That had to be absolutely awesome. Absolutely, I can't imagine the proud mama moment in all of that. It must have been amazing. In addition to being an amazing author and a 3-time Jeopardy winner and the mom of all of this, you also have a law degree. I mean, you've done a lot of things in your life that maybe when you were born, not everybody thought you might have done. And then,
but you know what? I for that I thank my parents, my grandparents, the family, the times I grew up in. No, everybody said, do what you want, go for it. You can do whatever you want. Don't let anybody stop you. So who knew?
Outstanding. And then just by the by, let's throw in, jumping into one of the biggest blockbusters in US history and writing Heat 2.
That was such an amazing opportunity and a wonderful process. And just quickly, Heat 2, I co-authored with Michael Mann, who wrote and directed the film Heat. So this is a prequel and sequel to the film. And the greatest joy is that readers connected with it really deeply. And it was #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And you can't get more validation than that. So I want to thank all the readers out there for telling me we did a good job.
Well, I'm sure all the readers want to thank you. And trust me, new readers, you will thank Meg when you start reading her work. Meg, speaking of new readers, I know you already have a ton of fans, but for folks who are new to you or just people who love you already, where's the best place for them to find you and reach out and know what you're up to?
I have a website, meggardiner.com, Gardiner. I'm also on Facebook, Meg Gardiner Books, Twitter/X at Meg Gardiner 1, numeral 1, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, LinkedIn. I have a blog. Look for this face, the little avatar, and you'll find me.
Perfect. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much for writing SHADOWHEART. Anyone who loves Meg has got to go out and get it. Anyone who loves thrillers has got to go out and get it. Anyone who loves a good read has got to go out and get it. Thank you so much, Meg, and thank you for letting me fangirl on you today.
It was my pleasure, believe me. Thank you so much for the time, Marie. This is wonderful.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining me on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.